Okay, that tells you what I'm going to be talking about. Every time I read articles about providence and the providential care of God, it was so highfalutin, it just got beyond me. Take a lawyer to work it all out, but I tell you, I'm not a lawyer. So, but when we started to study this Old Testament, the life of David in the Old Testament, it struck me. Here's a great example of how the providential care of God worked in David's life. And once we get a grip on that, we will know how the providential care of God works in my life and in your life. And that's basically what I'm going to be trying to do with some lessons. This is the first of some lessons on the providential care of God in David's life. I'd like you to turn first of all to Psalm 139. Psalm 139. The first 6 verses read, O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. Let's move on in the reading. In verse 15. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance. And in your book were all written, the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. And I think we could read verse 6 again with that. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain to it. Now, you have a glimpse here into God and God's knowledge of us. And it's not just of all of us. It's his knowledge of you personally. What he knows about you. He knows everything about you. I mean, everything. He knows your thoughts. He knows the words that will be on your lips even before you speak them. He knows what you do, what you don't do, how you've sinned, how you've done what was right, how you've repented. He knows it all, everything. We're an open book to God. He's known us as we were formed in the womb. He has known us from all eternity. And his plan for me is that my soul would be saved, and for you, that your soul would be saved, and that you will live in his kingdom with him forever and ever, in joy and peace and happiness and glory. That's what he wants for us. That's simple, and it's straightforward, and it's beautiful as well. So what we see here is God could see in his mind, he worked out everything that was going to happen on this earth and throughout its history and beyond this earth, even into heaven itself. And God knows it all. It's all present to him. Now, there's a wonderful thought that is too difficult for us to understand, because all we know is we weren't there at one point, and then we were there, and we're here now, and we'll be leaving this life soon enough, and we won't be here again. That's all we know. And we're limited. We're limited in our knowledge. We're limited by the people we associate with. We're limited to our age. We're limited, not just what age you are, but to the age that you live in. And we're very limited. So it's very hard for us to grasp all that God knows and all that God does for us. One of the things that we do learn from this lesson, and from the lessons that are to come, is God wants us to trust Him. He is a holy God. He is a just God. He's a righteous God. He always does what is right. He cannot do evil. He has nothing to do with evil. So we need to realize that no matter how bad things are and what terrible things that happen, we need to trust He knows what He's doing. And Job had to go through all the suffering that he went through in order to know that God knows best. We can say to Him, I don't think You're fair, Lord. I'm suffering here. I'm in terrible pain, and I don't think it's right. I've tried to do everything right in my life for You, Lord, and this is all I get in return for the way I'm living. And of course, Job complained that way. I'm righteous. I did the right thing. Why am I in this suffering and pain? I'm not an evil man. So the answer was, God showed him, look, were you here when I created the stars and the world? Can you, with your mind, move the stars in the sky, the Pleiades and those stars? Can you make the dawn happen and make the darkness bright? Can you do any of these things that I can do, that I have done, that I am doing? And the answer is no. Well, then how are you going to understand all that I do? You have to learn to trust me and know that I will always do what is right. So some of those things come into play now in this lesson. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 18. One of the things that we learn is that there are two characters involved here, and there's an interaction between both of them. It was King Saul and David himself. And it all started when David killed Goliath. And you would think, well, what a wonderful thing happened there. That he, with a few smooth stones from the river, was able to bring down Goliath, who was a giant and who had persecuted the children of God and defied them. Send out your champion, and whoever wins this battle will defeat the enemy, or will defeat those who are defeated. So nobody, Saul was sitting behind the wall, I think, and he was shaking because he was afraid of his life, as big a man as he was. And the lesson we learned from that was, Saul was a big man, but there's always somebody bigger than you. somebody stronger than you, somebody more intelligent than you, somebody more beautiful than you, somebody who has greater ability than you have. We're all in that boat. We need to learn humility. We want to be on the top of the pile everywhere and in everything. But even when you get there on the top of the pile, somebody else comes along and has better ability than you have, and is younger than you are, and wants to be there more than you do by the time you're finished up there, and you are set aside, and somebody else takes the place, and sometimes does a better job. We know that when David came back from defeating Goliath, all the women there must have been some sort of a big celebration, but all the women from all of the places in Israel came together, and they were applauding and lauding the great victory that Israel had won over the Philistines. And they happened to sing, Saul has killed his thousands, and David has killed his tens of thousands. And Saul, it got angry. He got angry at them. And he became very displeased with what they were saying. He said they have ascribed to David tens of thousands, but to me they have ascribed thousands. Now, what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day onwards. It was nothing David had done. It was what these women had said. And what they were saying was basically right. He had killed Goliath. He had defeated the armies of the Philistines at that time. Saul was involved in it. But David was the hero of the day. And Saul should have recognized that. They weren't trying to put Saul down. They were just trying to rejoice about the great victory, and that God had used this young man to bring about this victory for them. But Saul was jealous. Now, this thing of jealousy is very difficult for people. We've all suffered from it at some stage or another. That we've looked on somebody who is better than I am, or who has more than I have, and we've become jealous. Now, we know from our study of the book of James that where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. Now, we don't usually associate our jealousy with evil and evil thoughts and evil intentions. But you better start putting those Lego things together, because they go together. And jealousy can lead to murder. Jealousy can lead to maiming other people, even setting their house on fire. It can lead to things like that. It's madness. It's sheer madness. And all because our pride had been hurt. And it may not have even been hurt by intention on the part of the other person. It may just be something that I'm fabricating in my own head. I'm creating a situation that just is not there, except in my own head. But it's as real to me as it can be, and that's the danger. So he looked with suspicion on David from that day forward. Now, of course, David was, Saul had been rejected by God because of his disobedience. Saul had decided that God was not going to tell him what to do. He was the king, and it was his right to do what he wanted to do. He didn't really accept that he was king on behalf of God. He was just king. End of. This is where it's at for him. I'm not ruling for somebody else. I'm ruling for Israel. Or, in other words, I'm ruling for myself. So, through the providence of God, David was protected from the malice of the king. And we need to see how God did that. If we go to 1 Samuel chapter 19, and we look at the first few verses there. It says, now Saul told Jonathan, and Jonathan was Saul's son. When Saul told Jonathan his son and all his servants to put David to death, Jonathan's, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David. He was telling his son, this man David's got to be put to death. We've got to kill him. And he's telling that to Jonathan, but Jonathan loved David. Jonathan was a righteous man himself, and he loved David's righteousness and courage and David's leadership, and he admired everything in David. And David admired him, and they had bonded together as real friends. And now Saul is telling him to kill David. So Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, is seeking to put you to death. Now therefore, please be on guard in the morning and stay in a secret place and hide yourself. Now when he had done that, if we jump down to verse 4, it says, then Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him. Now this was a dangerous situation. This was a very dangerous situation. He knows his father wants to kill David, and now he's going to speak out on David's behalf. And that was very important for Jonathan to do, because he knows his father's making a huge mistake, but he's not afraid to put himself forward and to tell his father, you're making a big mistake. And it does take courage to stand up and be counted for somebody else, instead of going along with him and saying, well, David might be wrong, and it might be this and it might be that, and we're trying to appease rather than to confront. But Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, look at verse 4 now, do not let the king sin against his servant David, since he has not sinned against you. Now this is important. Why do you want to hurt somebody else when they have never hurted you, when they've never done any wrong towards you? Yeah, but I was talking to my neighbour yesterday, and she said that this is what this fella does. Oh yeah? Well, he's never done it to me. But instead of saying that, we say, oh, he must be a bad fella. I'll have to watch him. And but you need to judge by the evidence, not by hearsay, not by suspicion, not by anything else, by what's really happening. You have to judge the facts, not the fiction. And this is what he is saying to his father. Has he sinned against you? He hasn't sinned against you. He's not sinned against you, Jonathan said. And since his deeds have been very beneficial to you, for he took his life in his hand and struck the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all Israel, you saw it and rejoiced. When you were there at the time, you were so happy. You were convicted that he was a great man. He did a great thing for Israel. He saved the Israel from being defeated that day, and he gave us the wherewithal to go after them and to defeat them. But the young man had to put his life on the line to do it. Now, he was courageous, and his courage came from his faith in God. That was the one great outstanding quality of David, was his faith in God. He trusted God. That didn't mean he didn't do anything wrong, but basically his nature was to trust God. And he did that day and brought about a great deliverance for Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death without a cause? I thought that was very interesting. Innocent blood and putting David to death without a cause. You can't put somebody to death without a cause. Just because you think they shouldn't live, that doesn't mean they have no right to live. You can't put somebody to death or destroy somebody's character or rob him of his job just because your suspicions make you want to do it. We need to be upright, godlike, see the truth, commend those who are doing what is right, and help those and approve those who have never done me any wrong. Thankfully, Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul vowed, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. He was convicted. In what way? Jonathan just spoke the truth, that's all. He just spelled it out as it really was. He spoke the truth, and the truth is powerful. And the truth sometimes can get through to evil people. And they see it. Now, it might only be for a short time that they see it, but they see it if we have the guts enough to spell it out and to convict them that they're doing wrong or that they're going to do wrong. So fortunately, Saul took to heart what Jonathan said to him, because he knew it was the truth. And as a result of Jonathan's intercession, there was a period of peace in the palace, but it was short-lived. We jump down to verse 8 of 1 Samuel 19. When there was a war again, David went out and fought with the Philistines and defeated them with great slaughter, so that they fled before him. Now there was an evil spirit from the Lord on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the harp with his hand. Now David played music for Saul. Saul had these episodes where he was depressed and where he was down, and David would play on the harp and sing or whatever else to bring relief and for Saul and to help him. And while he was doing that, Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear. He's after winning another great victory for Saul. And all Saul can think of is, he's just trying to make me look bad, winning all these victories against the Philistines. He's trying to make me look, and I feel small, and I feel inadequate, and I'm going to get this fella. This fella's annoying me. I need to get rid of him. Oh, isn't it terrible the way when we get a twisted thinking, and when we start to think that way, what we can work out in our own heads as being true and real. So Saul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. God had used Jonathan, brethren, God had used Jonathan to deliver David from certain death, and he would use Jonathan again to help David under other circumstances that were threatening his life. So what we're seeing here, how did the providence of God work through the friendship that Jonathan had with David, and Jonathan's willingness to speak the truth to his father and to convict him, not to put him to death. Okay, very important. God also used other people. After the attempt on his life, David headed back to his home. He must have had some sort of dwelling place on the wall of the city. He's Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L. There's no E in it, so I presume that's the feminine way of spelling Michal. Michal, Saul's daughter and David's wife, warned David of the imminent danger he was in from her father. So she let him down in a basket over the wall, and he escaped. Michal, at this stage, later on there was a bit of a problem, but at this stage she loved David. I mean, she was enamored with him. He was the bee's knees for her. They'd just been married, and she was really happy with being married to David. So she saved his life. However, her father Saul was livid. Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me, this day, and let my enemy go so that he has escaped? What have you done here? You're working against me. What's wrong with you? Don't you know I want to kill this man? He's a danger to you. He's a danger to me. He's a danger to our whole family. He's a danger to the kingdom. He needs to be killed. And you helped him to escape. But you see, God could use Michal. She was Saul's daughter and close enough to Saul to know what he was planning to do to David. And knowing the urgency of the situation, she helped David over the wall in a basket. Now that is why God used her to extricate David from a life-threatening situation. Here was another person that God could use because she was close enough to Saul to know what was going on. And willing and loving David as much as she did, she'd be willing to help him to escape from the situation. But it was God who put it in her heart to do it. It was his way of protecting David. His way of protecting David. And why would he want to protect David? Because he had promised David that David would sit on the throne and that he would be king in Israel. He was anointed by Samuel to be king in Israel. And God wanted to see to it that that would happen. That was part of his plan for David and for Israel. Now God protected. David's on the run now. He has to have places to go and hide. He has to have people that will protect him. So God protects David through Samuel now. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 19, 20 to 24. I'll read from verse 18. Now David fled and escaped and came to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. It was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Then Saul sent messengers to take David. Now, it does say he sent messengers. I don't know whether they were part of his army or part of maybe they were just high-ranking officials that he sent down there as messengers to take David. My own feeling on it is that he sent down a battalion to take David, to take him away forcefully if needed, and bring him back, and they would do the job when they got back to Saul. But again, God had to intervene here because truly he was in real danger. It says here in verse 20, Then Saul sent messengers to take David, but when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing and presiding over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So here these fellas going down with murderous intent in their heart, or at least if nothing else, just grabbing David and forcing him to go back with them to Saul. But when they see the situation that's going on, where Samuel is overseeing the sons of the prophets who were then prophesying, the Spirit of God was upon them, they were prophesying, and it was so impactful. It impacted them to see it and to hear it and to witness it and to be so close to it that it affected them. And the Spirit came upon them and they started to prophesy. So Samuel, in this way, was helping David, or maybe God was directly helping David through the Holy Spirit coming upon these people so that they would prophesy. Now it seems like once they'd prophesied, they hadn't got the heart to take David. They had realized that what they were trying to do was wrong. They couldn't do it. Not after the Spirit of God came upon them. So here was God's way of protecting. And you talk about how is this situation going to be remedied? But God had a remedy at his fingertips. No problem, no difficulty. What seems impossible to us is possible for God. We mustn't doubt that God can deliver us when we've asked for deliverance. We mustn't start to specify how you want to be delivered, by whom you want to be delivered, when you want to be delivered, and you want to dictate to God the whole circumstances of your delivery because you are just manipulating God instead of trusting God. We need to just say, deliver me, Lord. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know whatever it is, you know what's going to happen, and you can deliver me. That's the faith we've got to have. Anyway, they mustn't have gone, but the messengers mustn't have gone back to Saul, because it says in verse 21, when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers. It must have been told him, they started to prophesy down there and they couldn't take David. And so he sends another delegation of messengers, and they also prophesied. So Saul sent messengers again a third time, and they also prophesied. Every time they were thwarted by God in what they were about to do in order that David might have the protection that he needed under these circumstances. In desperation, Saul then, we're told in verse 22, then he himself went to Ramah and came as far as the large well that is in Seku. And he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And someone said, behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah. He proceeded to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also, so that he went along prophesying continually until he came to Naioth in Ramah. So from this place called Seku, however far it was to Naioth, he was transformed already. The Spirit of God came upon him, and he walked there prophesying. So he was struck by the Spirit of God. It was a bad case too, because verse 24, he also stripped off his clothes. That would have been his outer garments. He wasn't nude. He was he's got undergarments, but he was took off probably his robes. And he too prophesied before Samuel and lay down naked all that day. The nakedness is, they always speak of that. When you took out off your outer garments, there you were naked in terms of the Bible. And he prophesied or lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore, they said, is Saul also among the prophets? So, David escaped here. He was able to leave unharmed. He was able to leave unharmed. So that was the situation and the way God was able to protect David under those circumstances. Obviously, this was the way the Lord protected David and thwarted the evil intent of Saul's heart. I'm amazed that God had so many ways at his disposal to deliver us through his providential care. Nothing is impossible with God. I think that's got to be the lesson for all of us. Nothing is impossible with God. I wonder how it affected David to see God intervene for him in that way, and him having a way of escape then under those circumstances. Anyway, this story goes on. We need to now go to the priests at Nob, and David escaped there to the priests. Nob was a city. He's not putting a rude name on somebody else, that Knobhead or something like that. So he's talking about a city here, and the priests. It was a city of the priests, and the tabernacle that they had taken around in the wilderness. It was situated at Nob at that stage. So sacrifices were offered there. The presence of the Lord was there. It was the religious center during this period of Samuel. And so he goes to the priests, and Ahimelech was there, and he's the one that was going to help David under these circumstances. Let's see, 1 Samuel chapter 22. Okay. Okay. David had come to the city of Nob to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" And David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has commissioned me with a matter that has said to me, 'Let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you and with which I have commissioned you. And I have directed the young man to a certain place. Now therefore, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever can be found." The priest answered David and said, "There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread, if only the young men have kept themselves from women." David answered the priest and said, "Surely women have been kept from us as previously when I set out, and the vessels of the young men were holy. Though it was an ordinary journey, how much more than today with their vessels be holy." So he's justifying the whole situation before the priest. There's all sorts of questions to be asked about how honest this statement was, how politically motivated, how deceptive it was in actual fact. But that I don't want to get into, because it'll take away from the whole thing here. Jesus makes reference to this incident in Matthew chapter 12. Let's have a look there in Matthew chapter 12. Verses 2 to 4. Now, when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on a Sabbath." They were just picking the heads of grain and eating them. But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he became hungry, he and his companions?" Now, there's a reference to the companions in 1 Samuel, but it's not clear. Now, Jesus makes that very clear that he had companions with him at this stage. How many? I don't know, a few. He goes on to say how he entered the house of God. In other words, he went into the area of the tabernacle, and they ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone. So what you had here is David trying to get some bread. He obviously thought there was other bread than the consecrated bread, but there wasn't, which sort of surprised me. It meant that the priests weren't getting the support that they were supposed to be getting from the people, and they hadn't got bread, which is basic, fundamental to life. Now, they obviously saved whatever wheat they had to put the new bread, which had to be baked and put on the altar every Sabbath day. The old bread was taken down, and the new bread was put on the trays before God. It was called the bread of the presence. Okay? So the old bread that was taken down was only a week old, and it was unleavened, so it would last a long time and be reasonably fresh. So the bread, the priests were to eat it in the confines of the tabernacle. Now David and his men, and the high priest must have felt that it was more important to be compassionate under these circumstances and set aside what was a ritual law in order to show compassion and to save life. And Jesus Christ agreed with him that compassion was absolutely necessary and essential under these circumstances. So they were able to break the bread together in that setting, and he was able to eat. Now, after eating, Ahimelech was asked if there was any spears or swords or anything around, and he said there was only one, and that was wrapped up in a cloth, and it was behind the altar. It was Goliath's sword, and he took it out and he gave it to David. Now, there's a little incident here in this whole business. Even though God was delivering David, it was going to be at great cost to the priests. There was a man there in the background who saw all that was going on. His name was Doeg, and he was an Edomite, but he was obviously a convert to Judaism, and he was head of Saul's shepherds. Oversaw all the flocks and oversaw all the shepherds and what was going on in Saul's kingdom. So he had what was I saying? Yeah, the Edomite was there, and he saw everything that happened. Now there was an occasion where Saul was with his men, and his advisors and all those, his cronies and all those who were supporting him and keeping him safe and so forth. And he was pressing them for information about David. He was saying, look,